Delaying an audio signal may seem trivial with modern digital technology, but the steps that got us to where we are today are actually quite incredible. And that's what I'm talking about in this video. It's the story of a long line of innovators who pushed the boundaries of music technology over the decades, using everything from tape machines and tin cans to garden hoses and modern digital chips. And the legacy of sounds they've left for us are still making it onto countless commercial releases today. Thanks to Sound Toys for sponsoring this video and supporting audio education. Sound Toys has a delay plugin called Echo Boy that was revolutionary when it was released and is still one of the most highly acclaimed delays among top engineers to this day. What makes Echo Boy the perfect tool for this discussion is the fact that it emulates almost every major type of delay ever invented. From the earliest tape delays to iconic hardware delays that shaped the sounds of the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and all the way up to the present day. Each one of these delay technologies has its own quirks and character that are still prized for their distinct personality and sound. Let's listen to each of these models, and in doing so, walk through the incredible story of delay, how it started, the ways it changed the sound of music, and where it will take us next. Today, we can simply type in the amount of delay we want, whether in milliseconds, seconds, or even musical subdivisions using a plugin like Echo Boy. But that wasn't always the case. In the earliest days, audio was recorded to formats like wax discs and cylinders, or sent over radio waves or wires for telephone transmission. But none of these systems offered a practical way to create an echo-like delay sound. In theory, you could delay an audio signal by simply running it across an incredibly long wire. But because electrical signals travel along wires at nearly the speed of light, approximately 270,000 kilometers per second, that means you could run thousands upon thousands of kilometers of cable and still end up with a very small delay time. Plus, you'd lose a lot of fidelity in doing that, thanks to the signal loss over that distance. When the first mechanical devices that could be manipulated to use delay creatively were invented, technology and artistry in audio production developed hand in hand, each pushing the other forward. The invention that really inspired the use of delay in audio production was the magnetic tape machine. A tape machine operates on the principle of recording electrical signals as magnetic patterns along a piece of plastic tape that's topped with a fine layer of metallic coating. Playing the tape back changes those magnetic patterns back into electrical signals that can be amplified through speakers as sound. So long as the tape travels at a constant speed during recording and playback, the pitch and timing of the audio will remain constant. A typical tape machine has two heads, one for recording and the other for playback. And since the tape machine is a physical device, these two heads can't possibly be in the exact same position in space. This means that if you record a signal to the tape with the record head and then play it back with the playback head, you'll hear the playback slightly later in time. This was a mechanical inconvenience at first, but it would someday become a really cool effect. Let's say you were recording a vocal microphone to a tape machine. If you had access to two tape machines, you could split the signal, sending one copy to the main tape machine and sending the other copy to a secondary tape machine that you could use just for the purpose of creating delay. Both machines would record the vocal at the same time, but when you route the output of the second tape machine's playback head into the record head of the main tape machine, it would result in two copies of the vocal with a slight delay between them. This kind of effect is often referred to as a slapback delay. Another way to use a short tape delay like this is to add pre-delay to a reverb effect, where there's a slight delay before the reverb tail begins. In this setup, you might send the signal from the secondary tape machine's playback head to a reverb chamber or other reverb unit, creating a delayed reverb. Adding pre-delay to a reverb increases the perceived size of the room because in real life, it takes longer for early reflections off of walls and ceilings to reach our ears in larger spaces. With enough pre-delay, the reverb starts to separate from the direct sound completely, making it an even more noticeable effect. One important thing to understand here is that the distance between the tape machine's record head and playback head determines the length of the delay that can be achieved with that machine. You can also lengthen or shorten the delay time by adjusting the speed that the tape travels between the two heads. However, even the most advanced tape machines rarely have more than a few speed settings, and changing the tape speed also impacts other variables like noise and fidelity, with lower speeds leading to longer delays, but with lower fidelity. With a single tape machine, you were basically stuck with a relatively short delay, especially if you wanted to preserve sound quality. If you really wanted to get a longer delay time, you could theoretically load a tape between two machines and adjust the distance between them, but that would have been pretty inconvenient and tedious, so longer delays didn't become a part of the musical vocabulary of those days. Once the tape delay phenomenon started to catch on, the ability to add a short slapback delay soon propagated throughout popular music, and inventive audio engineers soon dreamed up new devices to help make the effect more versatile and easier to use. Pioneering guitarist Les Paul is often credited with being one of the first to popularize tape delay in the late 40s and early 50s. In 1953, Ray Butts created the Echosonic guitar amplifier that had a tape delay built in, which was used by players like Chet Atkins and Scotty Moore. A few years later, Mike Battle introduced a device called the Echoplex, which added some of the features that we take for granted in delays today. Rather than a tape delay guitar amplifier combo, this was a standalone tape delay unit, similar to Charlie Watkins' Copycat around that same time. Both of these were much more portable than a full-blown tape machine and more flexible than an Echosonic guitar amp. But the Echoplex came with a few additional advantages. First, it gave users the ability to adjust the spacing between the record head and the playback head, allowing them to very easily manipulate the delay time. And second, it had an echo repeats knob, which opened the door to a critical concept in delay: feedback. By routing the output of a machine's playback head back into its record head, the Echoplex provided a way to create a sequence of delays. In essence, it created a feedback loop, hence the name. These days, we take this for granted because we can add in as many repeats as we want by adjusting the feedback control in our digital delay plugins. But in those days, this was a big deal, and it opened the door to a lot of creative potential. Engineers could utilize the feedback control subtly, adding a bit more texture to a mix, or they could take this concept to the extreme, creating a feedback loop that could build upon itself in a crescendo-like fashion and potentially even get out of hand. Another legendary tape delay unit popped up in 1973, the Roland Space Echo. Rather than the typical real design of a normal tape machine, the Space Echo operated with a free-running tape transport system and a solid-state circuit to make it more rugged and high fidelity than the older vacuum tube designs that I've mentioned so far, although the Echoplex was later released in a solid-state form as well. The Roland Space Echo's 3 tape heads following its record head made even longer, cleaner, and more complex delay sounds possible, as well as unusual special effects by manipulating its controls in real time. Some people like the improved fidelity, and others prefer the warmth and grime that comes with the vacuum tubes and additional wear and tear on the tape within the Echoplex. And today, they're just 2 tools for achieving different goals. Original versions of units like these can still be found in the wild. In fact, that's how Sound Toys created the Echo Boy plugin. If you've ever used one of these classic delay units yourself, let me know in the comments below. Whether or not you've used the original hardware, it's a worthy exercise to try out these two models within Echo Boy using the free trial link below the video. They've left an indelible mark on music production, and their unique sounds are a part of the vocabulary of recorded music up into the present day. Just download the plugin, load it into your DAW session, and start experimenting. As you'd expect, Echo Boy is a hybrid tool that offers the classic character of these units with more modern controls and capabilities. Magnetic tape isn't the only way to create delay. Italian inventor Bonifiglio Bini, excuse my pronunciation, created a new take on delay called the Benson Echo Rec, which utilized magnetic wire rather than magnetic tape. The same basic principle still applied. The delay would store electrical patterns as magnetic patterns along a magnetized material, in this case a wire. Rather than a typical tape reel design, the Echo Rec employed a drum. The reason this type of delay is often referred to as a drum delay. Around the circumference of the drum were a record head and several playback heads, offering more fidelity, more flexibility, and more durability, all of which led to this design being considered one of the best delay units of its time. Pink Floyd's David Gilmour took on a particular liking to this unit, which would define the sound of the band's music and the music of many other artists thereafter. While the most common delay unit used in the 60s was some version of the tape delay, there was another type of delay entirely, and the way it works is crazy. Ray Lubo introduced a delay called the Telray, which is more generally called an oil can delay. Rather than storing the audio signal on magnetic tape or wire, the Telray stored the signal in a dielectric oil, which acted as somewhat of a capacitor. Now, I am no electrical engineer, but said simply, there was a wiper head that created a series of charges within the dielectric oil. The can of oil was rotated, causing the oil to slosh around. Then there was a wiper head that could convert those charges in the oil back into audio signals and wires. This design doesn't rely on tape, so it was marketed as a lower maintenance, higher fidelity alternative to tape delay. But the reality was quite a bit different. The sound of the oil can delay is considered by most to be substantially more quirky and lo-fi than a typical tape delay. And original hardware units are notoriously difficult to service, so little is known about how they actually work and how to service them. Fortunately, this dying breed of retro delay is lovingly emulated in plugin form today. Another wild invention that operated on an entirely different principle for delay was the Cooper Time Cube, created by M.T. Putman in 1971. This thing was basically two coiled garden hoses with a speaker on one end and a microphone on the other. The delay component here was completely acoustic. The sound takes time to travel from one end of the tube to the other. This meant it had no moving parts, but also that the delay that could be achieved was much shorter and that it had a signature sound. Rather than a slap-back delay, this delay would achieve a thickening tonal effect, as can be heard in ZZ Top's Tush. The general concept is not unlike that of a spring or plate reverb. You've got an exciter and a pickup. However, rather than a long reverb tail, the Cooper Time Cube provides a much tighter delay, and it also has an awesome name. This is one of the few historic delays that isn't exactly emulated within Echo Boy, but we can potentially recreate the sound using the extremely short delays possible with the upcoming revolutionary technology in our story, the digital delay. But before we get there, the next delay technology that emerged is often referred to as analog delay. And the basic concept behind it was actually introduced far earlier than I initially thought when researching for this video. Way back in 1969, Leo Sangster created the concept of a bucket brigade device, or BBD, originally intended for computer data storage. The technology was especially useful for the lower frequencies used in audio, so audio engineers would eventually begin to harness the technology. The reason it's called a bucket brigade device is that the line of capacitors used within the device are akin to a line of firefighters passing buckets of water from one end to the other to put out a fire. The audio signal would be stored in one capacitor for a moment, then discharged and transferred to the next capacitor in line. And when you stack up enough of them, you can create a very long delay or a very short one. Earlier delay unit designs would also lose fidelity with each subsequent tap thanks to the nature of magnetic recording. Every time a signal is recorded to tape, then re-recorded and re-recorded, the fidelity will be decreased, most noticeably heard as high frequency loss. And the bucket brigade devices are also susceptible to similar loss of fidelity at longer delay times. Coincidentally, this loss of high-frequency detail was not only familiar, but it was actually welcomed by mixing engineers. Even if you have modern digital delays that can create extremely high-fidelity delays, it can still be useful to distort or low-pass the delay return to prevent masking and other displeasing interactions with the dry signal. One of the first audio delays that utilized the bucket brigade device technology was the Eventide Clockwork DDL 1745, created in 1971. The Boss DM2 is the unit that inspired the DM2 setting within the Echo Boy plugin. My digital recreation of the Cooper Time Cube was far from perfect, but it demonstrates what's possible with digital technology. In theory, we can create the general behavior of any of the units I've mentioned by using a combination of digital tools like delay, EQ, compression, saturation, and modulation, or by programming a custom algorithm. And this is essentially what the Echo Boy plugin does for us, with astounding accuracy. The basic principle behind a digital delay relies on digital audio conversion. The analog signal is quantized to a digital audio signal by an analog to digital converter. This signal will ultimately be converted back into analog audio with a digital to analog converter, but first it can undergo extremely precise and complex processing. Digital delays rely on mathematical functions and are therefore much less susceptible to noise, signal degradation, mechanical failure, and any of the other inconveniences of the previous delay unit designs. This is a double-edged sword though, because digital does what you tell it to do, but nothing more. Contrast that with the Echoplex or the other hardware units we've discussed, which can be much more unpredictable and mysterious. These analog devices often have a character which can be achieved by simply passing signals through them. The delayed sounds we're accustomed to hearing on our favorite recordings generally aren't pure repeats of the original sound. Instead, thanks to the quirks of the analog hardware, they'll usually exhibit some degree of saturation as well as roll-off at the extreme high and low frequencies, and a series of repeats that sound darker and darker each pass through the feedback loop. If you wanted to completely recreate the sound of a vintage delay unit using conventional digital tools, you may spend a long time manually shaping the sound from scratch. And you'll quickly find that delays that don't exhibit these analog style traits may sound unfinished, obtrusive, and unfamiliar. That's why the developers at Soundtoys and other companies dedicate so much time and effort to modeling these original hardware units with plugins. They do the legwork for us so that we can achieve those classic sounds without reinventing the wheel. And on top of that, you get those classic analog sounds in a digital environment with all of the benefits that that entails. Of course, there are benefits to digital delays. With digital delays, we can use ping-pong delays that bounce from left to right, or stereo delays with nuanced stereo behavior to create a much more rich and luscious environment for listeners. Digital delays also allow for multiple delay taps, which can be set independently from one another for even more complex rhythmic and textural effects. We can also become even more methodical and intentional about the delay times we use, dialing in a delay time by the fraction of the millisecond, or locking it into the exact BPM and rhythmic feel of the song. One of the early digital delays, prime time, included an interesting function that employed prime number values to prevent long delays from stacking on top of each other, a problem that had existed in prior days. As revolutionary as the primetime delay was, it could still be used to its limits. For example, longer delay time could be cost prohibitive in those early days, and the only way to achieve longer delays was to make a sacrifice in fidelity by lowering the sample rate, adding a degraded quality to delay repeats that was unique to the early digital world. It's a unique and sought-after enough sound that Soundtoys even directly modeled this unit on its own primal tap delay. As digital audio has continued to get better and better, we've reached a point where your imagination is basically your only limitation. Each time the technology advanced, new quirks, limitations, and possibilities pushed creation forward. Said differently, all throughout the history of audio, when innovators encountered limits, they began to rethink ways to get around those limits, and new musical vocabulary emerged. And that in turn created a thirst to push the sounds and the technological discoveries even further. And this brings me back to the underlying point of this video. At every stage of the timeline, the imagination of the audio community was the only real limitation. Each time musical minds imagined a sound that was previously impossible, inventive minds found a way to make it a reality. And each time inventors came up with new technology, creators found new ways to push that technology to its limits. Whether the obstacle was delay time, multitaps, or even just portability and durability. As technology developed, so did musical expression. And as musical expression developed, it pushed technology forward. It may seem like we've reached the end of innovation, but I challenge you to reject that thought. How will our limitations today create new possibilities tomorrow? Experiment and you'll find out. In the next video that's on your screen now, we'll look into things like modulation effects and saturation effects. Click the video on your screen and I'll see you there.